guys. So for video number 4, we are going to focus on the Protestant Reformation. So if you can remember back to where we were studying that Luther movie, that it's really going to help you to kind of remember. And don't think that when you go to study the Protestant Reformation that it's just going to be Martin Luther. You also have to think about some of the other religious things, that the religious groups that sprung out of Protestantism and Lutheranism. So make sure that you do review the Protestant Reformation, even if you feel like you got it pretty down. So when we're talking about the Protestant Reformation, there are going to be 8 major causes which causes such an abrupt change in the church. Up until this point, church was everything, and the church was the center of family life, social work, laws. The Pope had say over religious leaders. And so this is definitely going to take a huge shift when we're talking about the Protestant Reformation. Those 8 causes are going to be, number 1, church corruption, especially with those selling of indulgences, where basically you can spring your family member out of purgatory if you just pray a certain prayer and you pay some money, and that money goes towards the church and in the priest's pockets. Number 2 is going to be the impact of humanism and individualism, celebration of not just things that are divine, but humanity and our knowledge itself. Number 3 is going to be the church is just out of touch with reality and with everybody's everyday life. Teaching this prosperity and poverty, the goal is to be poor in Christ, and so you should just give all of your money to the church, which is a great idea unless the people are starving and they don't have the money to give to the church, and fear that if they don't give money to the church, they're not able to go to heaven. Number 4 is going to be the prestige of the papacy is going to be severely declining. Those are going to be through 2 different things, specifically like the Babylonian captivity, when France had a pope for a while, and then we have the Great Schism of the church between different popes and who's going to be the leader, and different Catholic churches kind of splitting there. Number 5 is going to be the influence of reformers, and that's going to not just be necessarily like Martin Luther, but it's also going to be scientists and humanists and these new ideas that are coming about. 6 is resentment from secular leaders. Leaders don't like the fact that the Pope can tell them what to do, and the Pope is a lot of times related to people, and so he kind of sways things one way or another based off of who he likes, and rulers don't really like to be told what to do. Especially as we're moving forward into those absolutist rulers, they're definitely not going to be wanted told what to do. Number 7 is going to be resistance to Charles V. So originally Charles V was a little bit on the fence with Martin Luther, not entirely sure what to do. And then later on, he decided to side with the Catholic side. And so as a way of gaining autonomy, the German princes of all the German provinces could claim to be Protestant, and then that would help them to kind of rebel against Charles V, who's going to be the Holy Roman Empire emperor at the time. And then lastly is Johannes Gutenberg's the printing press. It's a lot easier to spread ideas when you have an increase in literacy and you can actually tangibly hold books, and it's not going to be just popes and monks who are handwriting books anymore. So how's it going to start? It started in 1517 with Johann Tetzel being given permission by Pope Leo X that he could sell indulgences. And Martin Luther is a monk in that region at the time and decides that he doesn't really like this. And so around 1519 to 1520, he creates his 95 Theses, which he nails to the door of the church. And part of those 95 Theses includes that salvation is by faith alone, not works. You can't buy it from the church. Number 2, the Bible is the ultimate authority. It's almost like the Pharisees in the Bible, where they came up with a lot of their own rules. Well, the Catholic Church had kind of followed the same path with Christianity. Number 3 is going to say the grace of God brings absolution. It is by the grace of God that you are saved. Baptism and communion are the only valid sacraments. So those are going to be the only valid ways to be in connection with God. 5, the clergy is not superior to the common man, the laity. And this is going to be a huge upset because, of course, the clergy wants to remain superior to the laity. And number 6 is that the church should not submit to, or the church should submit to the state. So the state should take precedence over religion. 1520, Pope Leo X sends him a papal bull, which tells him to recant his statement and to give up on this idea. And he burns it, which he's a German monk, so this kind of puts Charles V into an awkward position. And Charles V decides, as a favor to Frederick the Wise, hey, I'm not going to send this guy to Rome and to the Pope without a fair trial, which if he had, probably Martin Luther would have been executed and we would not have seen that rise of Protestantism. And so the trial takes place in 1521 and the Diet of Worms. And in this, Martin Luther refuses to recant, refuses to give up his statements, and is miraculously saved by Frederick the Wise and is kind of kept in captivity for a while to protect himself for his own safety from the church. It is around this time period when the Anabaptists become a group, and they're a little bit different because they believe in adult baptism instead of like baby sprinkling, or baby baptism, which is still practiced in a lot of churches. 1524 to 1526, there's this thing called the Peasants' War. And so a lot of peasants were using Protestantism as a tool to try to get rid of the manorial system. And unfortunately for them, Martin Luther decided to side with the princes and tried to put down the violence and the extreme violence that was happening. If you remember, that was part of the movie as well. 1531, Zwingli moved to Switzerland, and with him he brought Lutheranism and kind of his own brand of it. And basically the way that they separate it is just that God's presence is only symbolic during communion. It's the major difference. 1534, the Act of Supremacy is when King Henry VIII created the Anglican Church. And if you remember, the reason that he did that is because he wanted an annulment from Catherine of Aragon to be able to marry Anne Boleyn. And when the Pope refused because he didn't believe in an annulment because of, the sacredness of marriage, the King Henry VIII just decided, like, I'm just gonna make my own church and I'm gonna be the head of that church. And that still exists today. And 1536 is going to be when John Calvin writes his book, The Institutes of Christian Religion, and creates Calvinism. With Calvinism, there are a couple different precedents that you kind of have to remember. Number 1, predestination, or the idea that God predestines or knows ahead of time who's going to heaven. Number 2, an elected church government. So it's not necessarily based by any sort of hereditary or, chosen thing by a certain elite group of people like the Pope was in the Catholic Church. Number 3 is going to say that no, the state should be inferior. The religion should take precedence when you're talking about state versus religion. He's going to be that first guy who's also going to be using the printing press. So we're continuing to see this spread of Protestantism. It's going to continue to split into like different factions and different, like the Calvinists and the Lutherans. And, if you know anything about the church nowadays, Protestantism has split in a billion different ways. In 1539, there is a Puritan revolution with Mary I, who takes over from her, from her brother, who took over from her dad, Henry VIII. And so she is a very staunch Catholic, and so she tries to bring back Catholicism to England, ends up failing because she ends up dying of breast cancer, and her sister Elizabeth I is a more in the middle ruler for the Elizabethan age. This is also when the creation of the Huguenots are. So Huguenots are going to be French Calvinists. I've said this 100 times, but with any sort of action that happens in history, there's always going to be a counter-reaction. And in this case, it's going to be the Counter-Reformation, where basically the church is trying to change and accommodate and try to get more people back in, But this is also through things like, the Council of Trent. But then there's also going to be groups of people who are very staunch and sticking to tradition and sticking with the way that the church is. And that's going to be specifically the Jesuits through their main leader, who's going to be Ignatius Loyola. So, don't get the Huguenots and the Jesuits confused. They are not at all the same. The Huguenots are going to be Calvinist, like Protestant, and then the Jesuits are going to be Catholic. So they're very different. Ignatius Loyola takes this idea of this extreme Catholic view and does the Spanish Inquisitions in 1542, where it's a very violent time period in Spanish history, where they're trying to find out who is truly Catholic. And honestly, Spain is still super Catholic today compared to the rest of Europe. 1555 is going to be sort of a calm-ish area with the Peace of Augsburg, and this is going to allow German princes to choose their own religion when it comes to Protestantism versus Catholicism or Lutheranism. There's a lot of things they can pick from. So when we're talking about the Protestant Reformation, there's a couple of results that you got to remember. First off, Northern Europe is going to be Protestant. Southern Europe, like Italy and Spain, is going to still remain Catholic. This Christian unity that had existed before the Protestant Reformation is going to be shattered. And so you're never again going to see like one Christian religion that everybody just agrees to. It's going to be scattered with different levels of theology. My next video is going to be all about the religious wars that happened as a result of this, with a lot of like, how do we figure out how this is going to work in society? You're also going to see this increase in the spirit of individualism, democracy, science, capitalism that comes along with Protestantism. And you're also going to see nationalism over religion. The state is going to go over the church for the first time since the establishment and the domination of the Catholic Church. And that is going to cause a lot of problems that continue to this day. And that's the Protestant Reformation.